Please welcome Astead Herndon, national politics reporter and the host of the politics podcast, The Run-Up, and his guest, Governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper.
It is so exciting to be here. Thank you for having us, and welcome to North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. We are happy to have you here at the Times Climate Forward Conference. I wanted to talk about the work that you're doing specifically around climate in North Carolina, but I also want to ask about the state more broadly. The Times just released a poll earlier this week showing North Carolina within 2 percentage points between Trump and Harris. Just as a landscape as to understand the state, should we think about North Carolina as a battleground, 50-50 state now? And what do Democrats need to do to turn that red, or historically red, at least in presidential races, to more purple or blue?
Well, thanks for wearing Carolina blue today. I
No
appreciate
problem.
that. Yeah, you know, Kamala Harris wins North Carolina. She is the next president of the United States. And we still remember in 2008 how Barack Obama won North Carolina, and we made history. I think people are ready to make history again in North Carolina with Kamala Harris. It is very close. We're the third fastest growing state, a lot of college-educated people. I've never sensed this much excitement since 2008. A lot of our volunteers at the polls are first-time volunteers. There's a reason that Donald Trump spent more money in August in North Carolina than any other swing state, and he and Vance continue to visit us almost every week because they're very worried about losing North Carolina. Kamala Harris can win our state. We believe that she will. And there's some down ballot things going on. Some guy running for governor on the Republican side has made a little news. And we think that there can be a bottom-up effect here of, because Donald Trump makes guys like Mark Robinson, supports them, encourages them, still hasn't condemned him in any way. He needs to suffer the consequences of creating and supporting people like Mark Robinson, as does every Republican leader in North Carolina who's supported and endorsed him.
So how should we think about this opportunity Democrats have in your state? Is it a Republican Party in disarray, or is it a Democratic Party uniquely united?
Well, Mark Robinson is the head of the Republican Party in North Carolina, and we have a lot of MAGA extreme candidates who've been nominated for statewide offices. So I believe that that threat has helped to unite Democrats and a lot of unaffiliated and a number of Republicans who are concerned about our democracy, who are concerned about women's reproductive freedom, who are concerned about climate. And so I'm very bullish on North Carolina. This is the first time in a couple of decades that I haven't been on the ballot, but I'm working as if I were, because everything I care about is on the ballot. And we want to continue the progress we've made in North Carolina.
Yeah, you mentioned the recent scandal involving Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. We don't have to go through the remarks specifically. You know, I'm trying to do my job.
You'll get a call from the FCC.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm like, I don't know if I can say that in good faith. But I do think that it speaks to a kind of larger thing that is important to understand, specifically at a conference like this, which is the change among Republicans that have produced, as you mentioned, candidates like Trump, like who have endorsed folks like Mark Robinson, and has created some challenges governing-wise for, I imagine, Democrats also working with a wide spectrum of Republicans, some of whom, or specifically on issues of climate change, have been denialist openly. For you, as someone who has made climate a priority, how have you been able to navigate the realities of a Republican state legislature and the realities of a Republican Party that's changing?
Well, first, when I came into office, I beat a Republican incumbent in North Carolina. And when talking with people in state government, they had been instructed not to say the words climate change. That's the kind of dynamic that I went into as governor. Mark Robinson has said, in talking about climate change, which he denies that it exists, he said that people working on climate change in his administration, he would put in chains, is what he said about that. So, look, you have to find a way forward. We know two things for sure. We know that climate change is an existential threat to our planet and to our people. But number two, we also know that the move to clean energy is providing a significant economic boost that's putting money in the pockets of American families. We've seen that in the work that we've done in North Carolina. We have specifically recruited clean energy companies during a 4-year period of time where I had a veto that was effective in the legislature. They did not have a supermajority. We used my executive order in the power sector, which is the goal to get to 70% carbon reduction by 2030, get to carbon zero by 2050. We actually got that into North Carolina law with Republicans supporting it. And we've also worked together on performance incentives that would attract these clean energy companies to North Carolina. I've also used executive power to create goals on EVs. We've leveraged hundreds of millions of dollars of federal money to move us forward. So even though we're meeting some opposition, there are a number of Republicans who realize that there are economic opportunities in clean energy, but also not just preserving the planet, but we've seen in North Carolina the real effects of climate change and weather, and that we have to be more resilient and more sustainable in order to be able to go forward in a successful way.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. How much of, when we think about climate, is it about the clean energy economic development and possibilities here, or has it been about the real kind of day-to-day challenges that have been posed and have become a governing issue? I'm thinking about flooding in places like the Outer Banks. How much has climate taken up a day-to-day task for you just in your role as governor?
Oh, for sure. You know, North Carolina had 2 500-year storms within 20 months of each other in the same place. We just had a 1,000-year storm event in southeastern North Carolina, 1,000-year. We know that that's not true anymore. We know that these events are going to become more and more intense. So we've spent a lot of time being smart about the way we approach rebuilding. We go into communities, we work with them, we have plans for local governments. You know, in some areas, you just shouldn't build back. And we've been able to convince certain communities and people that buyouts are better, and you create green space that soaks up flood water that comes and protects surrounding areas. When you do build back, you have to invest more in order for property to be more resilient. But when it is elevated, we even saw in some of the storms subsequent that those properties were unaffected because we had made them more resilient. So those are the challenges that we're facing every day. And it's one of the reasons why we've been able to get a number of Republican local officials, particularly on the coast, who said, okay, guys, climate change is here. We know that we have to do something about it. We know that the United States is the leader in the world, needs to set an example. North Carolina needs to set an example. And so we've gotten a number of them on board. There's still a lot of climate denialists out there. We've seen the Project 2025 that would throttle the work that's being done on climate change. There's a lot of resistance. But I think most everyday people understand that we need to move to renewable, clean energy. We need to take steps to become more sustainable, energy efficient, and we need to have leaders who will do that. This is not the kind of issue that moves up to the top in a political campaign. It's just not, because people are dealing with day-to-day issues. Where am I going to get quality child care? How am I going to take care of my parents?
Yeah.
How am I going to get more money for my job? But we've got to make sure that we are electing leaders who look at the long term and are willing to invest their political capital and their experience in making sure that we are taking steps to protect this planet and to protect our children and our children's children.
You're the only Democratic governor in the Southeast. I wanted to ask about the regional lens to this. Is there a specific way you have to come to this issue in the South? Is there a specific lens or impact that is happening there that you think is less talked about in the climate conversation nationally?
Well, when I talk with my red state governors and work with them, the way to get to this the best is economics, as I've mentioned before. And when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law funding, a lot of it is going to the red states. And there's some complaining about that, but here's what's happening. You're getting an economic stake in clean energy in states that might otherwise oppose it. And if there's a change in an administration, if there's a change in, there's always a seesaw in electoral politics that's partisan. You want to make sure that the investments we're making in clean energy can survive a blue wave or a red wave. And if you make it a lot harder when they talk about eliminating the rest of the funding for Inflation Reduction Act, then these businesses go to their governor, to their members of Congress, they're Republican, but say, hey, you really want to kick all these people that are working here out on the street? Mm-hmm. They don't. So the economic aspects of that have pulled us together.
It's harder for someone to reverse course if that stake has already been put in the ground.
That's exactly
particularly
right.
These red states.
That's exactly right. And I think was a smart move by the Biden-Harris administration. It was difficult. Same with EVs. You've restricted the number of EVs that you can have that you get the tax credits for. But what you've done is you've created the supply chain, and you've worked to make sure that in these red and purple states that you have these businesses that are there that are going to be really hard to root out because they're so successful economically, and we know that we have to remain competitive in the world. So I think that's smart. I've been able to enter into regional agreements too. I went in with Virginia, Maryland, and South Carolina, and we just got a significant EPA grant, over $400 million, to make sure that we are preserving forest lands and swamp lands that can help prevent the carbon from getting into the air. It soaks up carbon, and it'll save millions of tons of carbon. And we were able to get them to go in on this regional grant application for us. And when you're preserving property, when you can use it for parks and things like that, it appeals to people in both parties. So that's been a positive thing too. We've also gone together with Maryland and Virginia to help promote offshore wind. We look at these, and remember when Donald Trump won and immediately canceled the Paris Accords, governors got together in a bipartisan way, and 24 of us formed the Climate Alliance, which we said, no, we're still in this Paris Agreement. And that represented more people, a vast majority of people in this country.
You mentioned the opportunities that federal legislation like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act have provided North Carolina. Has there been any challenges with implementation, and where are you looking for that to improve?
So there's always challenges with implementing that much money, but it's one of the exciting things about being governor right now is that you try to invest this money in the most effective and efficient way. And so even though there's still some opposition to clean energy and the fight against climate change, we're able to take this federal money, it's hard to turn down, and do some great things with it, like clean school buses and cleaner city buses, and making sure we're moving more to public transportation. Those kinds of things have been received very well. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of success from these generational investments.
And that money's reaching the ground in North Carolina.
It absolutely is. And, it's going to take a while to do. And that's one of the reasons I want Kamala Harris to be elected, because I want this money to continue to flow unimpeded, because we are making a difference. We are connecting people to high-speed internet that we never thought we could. We're fixing roads and bridges and water systems in forgotten areas that they didn't expect they would ever get help. People that needed it for a long time. That's exciting, and I would want to see that continue.
Mm-hmm. We mentioned the kind of D versus R kind of split in North Carolina and how you've appealed to the other side. I was curious also about kind of climate activists versus kind of corporate interest. Where do you see the role for corporations in the kind of fight against climate change? And how do you have to pitch that to members of a Democratic base, maybe a climate activist collective, who sometimes is resistant to that?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I tried to install an advanced clean trucks rule, which required more production of clean trucks. And that not only to fight climate change, but it gave North Carolina companies first choice and better pricing in electric trucks that they may want to use for their fleets, because other states have passed these rules. Mm-hmm. And when they're manufactured, this is where those trucks are going to go, is to the states that have to fulfill the requirement. So my argument was, let's give our businesses that, because corporate interests did push the Republican General Assembly on this, saying, hey, we want to electrify our fleet. We want to leave a zero carbon footprint. And there are a lot of corporations out there that want to be sustainable and want to be a part of that, who can work with climate activists and say, hey, we're doing things. Now I know there are always debates about whether they've done everything they should do, et cetera. But there are positive moves that these companies are making. And like having an electrified fleet, advanced clean truck would help them. We weren't able to get it through. They passed legislation that I could not. I vetoed it, but couldn't get it passed because they stopped it. But those are the kinds of things that I think we need to continue to work on, and getting businesses more involved in helping us with lobbying state legislatures and helping them carry out their core corporate mission to have a cleaner
mm-hmm. But you believe that corporate willingness is there if
there,
the issue aligns?
It's often not as much as you want it to be, because they're mostly concerned about the quarterly earnings and the shorter term. But there are many great corporate citizens in North Carolina that do understand the importance of fighting climate change and who want their companies to be moving into the clean energy arena. And mm-hmm. we want to help them, and that's one of the reasons why we have recruited them mm-hmm. to North Carolina.
I saw a quote from the Star News Online, a paper in Wilmington, North Carolina, that said, Roy, our governor spoke at the DNC last week, but he didn't talk about climate change, which has been a focal point of Cooper's 2 terms in office at the Tar Heel State. Political science say there's a simple reason for that. Voters see other issues as more important in their daily lives. You kind of mentioned this earlier, the ways that the issue matters to people and is experienced as a big effect, but it's sometimes not at the top of the list when it comes to individual folks' concerns. I was wondering for you, do you see it as part of your role or responsibility to change any of that? And how do you, is something lost if the appeals that you're making, specifically on the climate change front, are only economic?
So that's why we go on your podcast to spend some time talking about
into the mic. Yeah.
No, seriously, spend some time talking about these issues. When you've got 3.5 minutes to introduce Kamala Harris at the Democratic National Convention, you have to be pretty on point with your message about who she is and why people should elect her as president. Climate change is one of those issues, but there are a lot of issues left off mm-hmm. the list, because you just have to be succinct in what you're talking about. But yeah, that is a problem with the issue of climate change. And I talked to my environmental activist friends, who I'm so grateful for them, because they keep up the drumbeat of what we need to be doing. And there's a frustration that this isn't at the top of the list of what candidates are talking about. But they know which candidates will help in this fight, and they need to work to help elect these candidates regardless of the issues that have been brought to the top in a political campaign.
Mm-hmm. So is the onus on politicians to find a message that can change that priority, or you're just saying the voters know where both sides kind of stand on the issue, so you can focus on other things.
So you have to meet people where they are, and not change your message, but you only have so much time in order to be able to try to communicate with people. I think people along the eastern coast of North Carolina are listening to the issues about climate change and how we need to respond to these storms. We have one coming up the Gulf now, Helene, that I'll go back and declare a state of emergency in North Carolina. We'll see a lot of rain in our mountains, and we'll have to deal with that. We have to deal with that pretty much constantly. We've got to take the long-term view to make sure we're doing everything we can to fight climate change. But the great thing is we can grow our economy at the same time.
We've talked about the federal level, but I also wanted to make sure I asked about some state standards you introduced in 2018, North Carolina's first greenhouse gas emission reduction standard. Are you on track to meet those goals? I know some of them come up in the next year. And how have you gone about kind of making sure those climate ambitions were reached?
Yeah. So first, I set an overall goal of a 50% reduction by 2030 of overall carbon emissions, a 70% reduction of power sector emissions, and of course, carbon zero for everything by 2050. The power emissions we are closest to because we have it into law. Now, the law has some flexibility, so we're having some struggles right now with the utilities to make sure that we meet this goal as quickly as we possibly can. I still believe we can make 2030. There are some of the utilities who think they may need another year or two, but I think having it into law and already seeing significant solar development, I want us to do more offshore wind in North Carolina, but I feel very positive about that. And we're continuing to do other things to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the board. And the fact that we are making this part of our conversation, that these goals are set, we blew through the number of electric vehicles that I wanted on the roads by 2025. We've already hit that 80,000 number. We're now over 100,000. So I set a goal of 1.25 million by 2030. I think we can make that.
One of my last questions is you mentioned obviously the Biden administration's record investment in terms of fighting climate change. I was at a climate protest a couple weeks ago, and you still see some folks who are still hoping that the administration would have done more. Things come up like declaring a climate emergency, which is a standard that some activists had set that had not been met. I was wondering if you thought that the Biden the Biden administration should have done that, and if not, has there been enough messaging about translating what has been record investment into, saying this is is climate getting enough of a PR from the administration? Right. I guess that's what I'm saying, and more complicated.
Yeah, I'd rather have results than hot air. And I think that is what the Biden-Harris administration has done. They have been the most climate-friendly administration in history. When you're pushing legislation through Congress, that's one of the hardest things to do. And to think about the fact that they got Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure, CHIPS and Science, American Rescue Plan, all of this funding to go toward the fight against climate change. What EPA has done, Michael Regan, I appointed him my Secretary of Department of Environmental Quality. President Biden said, I need him in Washington, so President Biden made him EPA administrator. They've come out with some great greenhouse gas rules. We've got to fight the Republican U.S. Supreme Court, unfortunately, and we've got to always fight with Congress. But we are making progress, and the key is results. The key is electing people who will do things and not just say things. And I think that this election, this November, there's going to be a lot told on this story about who we elect.
So if I hear you correctly, it may not be that climate change itself is the electoral winner for Democrats, but the economic impacts that come from it is something that they can pitch, and there's something that's well received.
Well, it's something they can pitch, but it also can help broaden the circle of elected officials who will help you get the work done. And I think that that's what we've seen mostly in North Carolina, because people have looked, wow, this is putting money into pockets of North Carolina families. These jobs are amazing. Let's continue to recruit these clean energy jobs, and it's making a real difference for our state.
Governor Cooper, thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate you all for listening to the conversation.
Thank you.